All right, so this is going to be a interesting episode because I'm going to have one of my games that I played pulled up, and I want to talk about psychoanalysis. Um, for those of you that don't know psychoanalysis or have any idea what psychoanalysis is or what I'm talking about, basically it begins with Freud, right? Um, and you know, I don't want to say that because I think there's some controversy over whether, you know, these ideas are specifically his or that he was the originator of these ideas. But, when we talk about, for example, when we talk about the father complex, the Oedipus complex, and so on, I thought chess, I thought chess would actually provide a very interesting perspective to talk about what in psychoanalysis we would deem as the father, or the or or the king. I think the king, the father, has very kind of synonymous terms. Jordan Peterson actually uses a lot of these terms interchangeably. The father, the king, especially because he uses Jungian terms. But anyways, what I would like to talk about is that in chess, right? If we want to talk about kind of a psychoanalytic equivalent, we could say the king is the father, right? Um, but here's an interesting aspect where in the Oedipus complex, right, in the mythology, the boy wants to kill the father out of um, out of basically desire to want to have the mother, right? To have the mother, right? In this kind of mythological uh, sense making of the Oedipus complex. But what's interesting about this, right, is that in chess, you're not trying to kill the father, right? You're not trying to kill the father, and the queen, right, the mother, is actually the strongest piece in the game. But here's the thing, it gets really complicated, right? It gets really complicated because even though the queen, you could say, is very distracting in terms of its value, like it's probably the most valued piece in the game because of its positional directions, right? It can go, like, for example, it can go all sorts of ways, right? It can go here, 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 like a lot of ways. Um, and so a lot of players don't want to give up, here's the metaphorical terms, right? Don't want to give up their queen. Uh, it becomes like the object of their desire. Why? Well, I mean, it's the only piece uh, that can basically, I mean, again, it's the only piece that can go in so many directions. And it it's a really good piece to basically some good players can just use this piece alone and just wipe the floor with somebody, right? If they know how to use the queen. Um, but in chess, right, when we talk about the father, when we talk about in psychoanalytic terms, I heard a grandmaster talk about that actually the object of the game isn't to capture the king, right? It isn't to capture the king. What would this mean in kind of in terms of equivalence in um, psychoanalytic terms? This would mean, you know, that the object of the game isn't to kill the father, obviously, right? And it's because the boy in the mythology, the boy wants the mother. Um, but see, the thing is, the object in the game or the objective in chess is that the objective in chess is that you have to do checkmate, right? That's the objective of chess. And a lot of people think the objective in chess is to capture the king. The thing is, you can't capture the king. You don't ever capture the king. The objective of the game is to checkmate. And I found these terms, this objective, um, very interesting because what it reveals to me is that it could reveal a sort of blind sight, um, a sort of blind sight in psychoanalysis, right? Um, Let me see here. King's Gambit is the way to go. I do the headless King's Gambit. Nice. Uh, and so this idea, and okay, so what I'm trying to say is when a grandmaster talks about the objective of chess is to checkmate and not capture the king, um, then what is checkmate in psychoanalysis? And I think that's like the real question that kind of really got me going. What is checkmate in psychoanalysis? What does that mean? Well, the only way you can get checkmated in chess is if you can no longer basically move your king, right? There is just a position to where the king can no longer move because the king will then become captured, right? But theoretically in the game, the king can never get captured. It's only checkmate when the king can never move to a position because it will get captured. And so I think chess identifies something. It's if we were to take a very Hegelian position here, and I'm pretty sure people would kill me for this, but if we take consciousness as the criteria, like Hegel says, um, it's interesting that chess exists in the first place. It's interesting that chess exists in the first place, and that it's a game that actually it fools us with its meanings and values, and you can actually get checkmated if you value the queen too much, right? Uh, and so in psychoanalysis, when Freud identifies the Oedipus complex, um, I mean, you could say in chess terms, this bodes well. At least on paper, it seems to fit perfectly well, right? Because uh, you can lose if you're too stubborn on giving up your queen, right? You can lose. A good player can make you lose if you're too stubborn and giving up your queen. Because actually, there's an equivalent exchange that can be given up, right? You can use various pieces to basically uh, basically make up for losing your own queen. And so, but what's really interesting about this is that a lot of players get fixated on the value of the piece itself and not the positional uh, value that a piece can give you if you lose it, right? Or what a piece can open up for your other pieces. Um, and so, okay, what am I trying to say in psychoanalytic terms? What I'm trying to get at is that a lot of times in psychoanalysis, um, there's always a fixation on, mother, daddy, all these sort of kind of like signifiers. I guess that's the best way to put it. Signifiers of desire. But what's not mentioned is that, and maybe I'm wrong. It's possible. I can be wrong, and that's fine. But the whole point of this video is to be provocative and just to kind of look at thought here. Because the most interesting thought I had this past week with just playing chess was, what does checkmate mean in psychoanalysis? What does that mean? Because Obviously, the objective in chess is not to capture the king, but actually to get checkmate. But checkmate is bad for both players. So obviously, the object of our game, this game, life, whatever we want to call it, is actually to not get checkmated. And so actually becoming too fixated on protecting your queen, right, will cause you to get checkmate if you're not paying attention. But then also being too fixated on protecting your king can also get you checkmated because you're so desperate to not lose it. You don't make a good move to provoke the other player to protect or react with his king or protect his king. So at that point, if you're just always protecting your king and sort of guarding your king so it doesn't get checkmated, you're probably going to end up losing, because what ends up happening is your opponent is going to become more developed. And I'll give you an example here, right? What do I mean by more developed? Well, it's kind of like this. Let's see where an exchange happens. Just wait. Okay, right here. My opponent could have took this, right? He could have took that pawn. He didn't take anything, right? He's just doing this. And actually, the computer tells me I should have taken a pawn at this point. But I'm pretty sure the computer on his side tells him that he should take a pawn. Anyways, I decide to push my queen out and just pin his knight. It's really funny that the computer doesn't like this idea. But anyways, that's fine. Okay. But my main point is that sometimes the signification itself, right? Players get so fixated on the meaning, the queen, the king, but what actually loses the game for you is the way you position your desire. And I think that's really important. And that's something that's made me think a lot. Because, yeah, I mean, if we go back, right, these pawns don't really mean anything, right? All these pieces in these backline right here, it means a lot, right? We got the knight, the bishop, the queen, the king, and the rook. Like, all these pieces mean a lot. However, the reason why they mean a lot is because they afford you, or they have the potential to afford you, a specific position in the game. And so I thought chess, when I looked at this game and I began to play it, what I began to understand is that it's almost like a very visualized, it's almost like it gives you a little visual of how desire moves, right? How desire moves. And I want to give you a good example of how desire can move and what chess has been teaching me, and like how desire moves. For example, right here, right? So clearly I have two options. If you don't know, in chess, I have a couple options, right? As white, I could take his pawn, right? I'm gonna put it like this. I could take his pawn. I could, right? And I probably should take it just to control the middle. But actually, the computer says you shouldn't take the pawn. You should just ignore it and just continue pushing. But then this happens, right? The opponent blocks me. So my pawn, let's just talk about this as a metaphorical desire, right? Wants to push forward. That was the recommended move by the computer after analyzing this game. But then my opponent blocks me. I legit cannot move anymore. And this piece is going to be a dead end because of this piece right here in front of me, is going to make this piece a dead end. And so right here, desire gets blocked. But I can exchange. To keep it moving, I can exchange. The real question is it worth the exchange? What opens up, right, if I take this exchange? What is open after all the gates are broken loose? So do I really want to make that exchange? The computer says yes. After thinking about it, it does say yes, you should take the exchange. Why? Because you have something else that will cover that exchange, right? It's going to protect you from that exchange. And it's still kind of hard to wrap my mind about, what do we mean by positioning of desire? What does this mean? It's so complex, and this is why, and the reason why I'm talking about the position of desire is that chess has given me a lot to think about in terms of, instead of talking daddy, mommy, these mythological kind of things, I think I've grown to the point where it's like, I think they're good examples or kind of representations only to explain where desire is currently positioned. And the tendency that people tend to put desire. But it doesn't, and I think this is what some of the anti-Oedipus from Deleuze and Guattari, I think this is some of their ambivalence about it, is that it still doesn't quite explain why desire is positioned like that, or why desire has the tendency to be positioned like that in the first place. I think that's a lot of the misconceptions about the book. The book is actually trying to say is not that they necessarily disagree with the Oedipus complex. It's just that they believe that it still doesn't answer what the problem is. I think, if I were to really, really say my interpretation of anti-Oedipus is that they believe that it doesn't really answer the problem. What is the real problem? It doesn't really address what the problem is. And I think chess kind of reveals that, because, if I were to ask average chess players, what's the object of the game of chess? People that, and when I say average people, I mean people that probably don't play chess as often. They'll probably say something like, "Oh, the object of the game is to capture the king." Right? But it's not. It's not. The object of the game is checkmate. But the thing is, we both as players want to avoid checkmate. So in psychoanalysis, how do we avoid checkmate? Well, the only way to avoid checkmate is to constantly move in such a way that you never get, that it becomes impossible or almost so disturbingly annoying that the king can always move. The king can always just move around, right? He always has space to move around. And so he's never captured, and that means the game never ends. Of course, in chess, there's a time, so we can talk about that philosophically, but it's given me a lot of thought about, desire as position and what it can afford you, rather than getting stuck on the signification. And I'll tell you why it's so dangerous getting stuck in the signification again, because again, a lot of players, right? A piece moves forward. Give you an example. Let me see. Okay, so I think this is actually a good example here. So the computer says this is a bad move for me, right? It's a bad move that I did this. Even though in my mind, I'm like, look, if he moves his knight, it's check, right? I have him at check, king full insight. Um, but here's the thing. The computer says my opponent should have just moved forward. He should have just ignored. Um, Actually, he did ignore. And he just ignored me completely. But the thing is, psychologically, some players get so fixated on the fact that this is their knight that is in attack, right? It's under fire right now. And a knight is a decently important piece. Um, and some players get so fixated on the knight that they will want to move the knight, right? Until they realize that they can't. And so maybe they'll do something like this, right? They'll put the bishop in front to block the checkmate. Or maybe they'll put the queen in front to block the checkmate. Or maybe they'll just move the king over here, right? And a lot of players do get fixated, and I'm trying to think of like maybe there's a blunder somewhere. Okay, right here. I think this is also okay. Again, basically, what I'm trying to say is that sometimes the significations of the pieces themselves can make you lose the game. Can cause a checkmate. And I feel like when we talk about psychoanalysis, when we talk about the father, the mother, these signifiers, a lot of people don't want to let them go, right? It's highly valued. The queen, the king, probably the most valued pieces in the entire game. But again, it's not the object of the game. The object of the game is checkmate. And desire as what the position can afford you is what really allows the game to continue. So actually, sometimes giving up your queen, giving up your bishop, giving up uh, your important pieces of what, because I mean, yes, the queen is worth 9 points technically, right? That's very scary to lose it. But again, it's all about, if I lose this queen, what is afforded to me in terms of position rather than value. And a lot of players, again, a lot of players get so fixated on not losing their queen. They don't want to lose their queen. And you will lose the game because what happens is it causes a blind spot in as you play. And I've done it before because the whole time I keep thinking. So, and I think this is a perfect example, right? Uh, this pawn is threatening to take my queen, and actually he will. Now the thing is, what I could keep thinking, not I'll be surprised what I do afterwards, is what other position can I use that will cause a checkmate, that actually he won't be able to take my queen, right? So he's actually threatening my queen, thinking I'm going to retreat. But watch this. Watch what the computer recommends I do. Watch this. Take it. I take the pawn. I actually took his threat completely, right? And the computer actually says that's a great move, right? Because here's the thing: I didn't get scared. I didn't get scared, right? I almost got scared because I was like, oh my God, I don't want to lose my queen. I'll just retreat, right? I'll just retreat. Instead, I went, this is not real, like basically, and I took it. And now I'm still threatening the king. But again, a lot of players right here will choke. Why? Because this piece is threatening the queen. Instead, they keep forgetting that the queen can just take the piece. Instead, they'll do this. They'll be like, oh, I'm going to just retreat, put it here, right? But it's a false threat. And my opponent didn't actually think it through at all, right? Because the computer says it's a blunder, right? You just gave away a free piece. He's thinking he's threatening my queen. But again, that's just to give an example of the fixations that players can get caught up in when, for example, that player specifically thought I was going to place so much value on my queen that I was going to retreat because I didn't like it being under threat, right? But actually, I didn't care that it was under threat because it wasn't a real threat. And I didn't really take the signification as detrimental, right? So again, the aim of this video really, hopefully I didn't throw in too much. I didn't throw in much chess lingo, actually. A lot of people go like, oh, we'll go to b4 and then c6 and then but again, but also, uh, you know, analytically, psychoanalytically, right? The pawns, have almost no signification until endgame. Now, what's interesting is that a pawn can become anything, any piece it wants when it reaches the king's side. And I had to keep asking myself this question: what does that mean in terms of psychoanalysis? What does that mean? The fact that the pawn can actually become any other piece except the king. But also the king is the most elusive object in the game, right? Because in order to keep playing the game, the king has to be the most elusive object in the game. And yet the object of the game is not to capture the king, but actually to checkmate. And again, that's given me so much thought. And I don't have much answers. There's no answers that I have for this. But I'm hoping maybe the people that watch this, maybe they'll have some ideas of their own. But again, I think the pawn symbol, or the way the pawn is, I think it has a good argument to justify when Deleuze and Guattari find the unconscious to be an orphan. And the reason why I say that is because if we take the unconscious as some kind of orphan, then it's like, yes, the mother and the father, they do have a lot of value in there. But the thing is, a pawn can always become a queen, any other piece. And then the king is always the most elusive thing. If you actually capture the king, but you can because it's impossible, then really no father exists. Almost almost like theoretically. It's only when you put the position in such a way that the king can never move. But that doesn't mean you've captured the king. It just means you put the king in a position that it can no longer move. And I think this is the danger that psychoanalysis may run into, is where you're trapping desire. You're trapping desire in such a way that the king can no longer move. It's not that we've captured. It's not that we captured the king. It's that you've got yourself in some kind of checkmate, and you've positioned desire in such a way that it can no longer move. And what I'm trying to say is, one of those traps that can get you in checkmate is by giving too much signification to the pieces themselves, right? To the value themselves. A lot of players, and when I started playing, I'm still very new, is that a lot of players in the beginning will tell you how much value these pieces are, right? This whole line, so much more valuable than these pawns. But when we talk about endgame here, these pawns are just as good as all these pieces, because they can become basically all these pieces except the king. So I mean, again, the idea behind this video is not to, I don't even know if it's a critique of psychoanalysis. I don't know what it is, but all I'm trying to do is just, I'm trying to be provocative here. I'm not really trying to be a philosopher. I'm not trying to be say anything crazy. I'm just trying to be provocative here. And I feel like if it causes a response, then I did my job, right? I did my job. I provoked some kind of response. I provoked some kind of thought. Um, and I don't, I don't specifically have a, direction. Someone could come on and disagree with me, but I hope that if it's a disagreement, that at least it causes some new thought, right? Some new thought in maybe their disagreement. Uh, but I think, I mean, that's really all I have to say. Uh, and I've been thinking about this probably like on and off as I've been playing chess. I've been really thinking about this, the idea of the father, the mother, um, and how really the game is not so much about the significations of the pieces, because that's actually distracting. It's what the pieces can afford you positionally. It's what the pieces can afford you positionally, but sometimes giving up those pieces gives you a better position. Um, and what does that mean in terms of desire? How do we position desire in such a way that we avoid checkmate? That we avoid checkmate in, psychoanalysis. Because I get the sense when I engage with the community, I get the sense that a lot of the engagement is like this. Let me cancel these lines. It's like this, psychoanalysis. Sometimes when I hear people talk about it, engage with it, it's like you're doing your opening, right? And people are very safe with their openings, right? No pieces taken. You have your king, your queen. Uh, it's just very safe. You're developing, so on and so on. But then when it gets to, let's just fast forward here. There's a bunch of this, right? There's just a bunch of this. What is this? Well, this is endgame, right? Structure is all over the place. There is no more structure at this point. He's got almost nothing to protect the king. Let's just forget. Let's just see how it goes. I think the guy runs out of time, actually. Right? Uh, And this is endgame. What is psychoanalysis in endgame? What is it doing? What is it doing? What is it doing to avoid checkmate on the king? Because again, it's not about capturing the king, but what is it doing to avoid checkmate? And here's the funny thing about trying to avoid checkmate is that your opponent could start taking advantage of the fact that you don't want to get checkmated, right? And there's something called a forced move, right? Where I can put you in check, take advantage of that check, because now you have to move your knight and you have to move your king. You have to move your king. You have to. There's no choice. You have no choice. You have to move it. And then the player, because the player keeps thinking, I'm going to try to check his king. But actually, the strategy is this. I'm going to check your king because it forces you to move your king. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take advantage of that moment and respond with a sequence where I take another piece on the board. I just, take another piece. I mean, that's not how it works. I mean, well, with this piece, that's not how it works. But what I'm just saying is like, I'll take another piece, right? And it's very very disheartening when you are experiencing this as a player, right? Because your opponent has you in check, and in the game of chess, you have to move your king. You have to move your king, and some opponents, they keep thinking, oh, they're just trying to check me, so then I'll just keep moving my pieces, right? I'll just keep finding a way. Well, no, your opponent will check you and then take advantage of it and start blocking you, and then finding another way to check you so they can do another move sequence to either take a piece or start creeping up on you. And so it's interesting to think about what's a forced move in psychoanalysis. What is that? What is that? What would that look like? What is a forced move in psychoanalysis? What does it mean when the father gets in check and the father has to move positionally? It has to move positionally. And I think maybe that's the crux of this whole talk, is that maybe what I'm trying to say is we act as if the father, the king, never moves. It never moves. We act like it never moves. And if you never move it, you're going to get checkmated. Or you're going to get checked. And then you have to move. And I think when I ask this question, it's a matter of like, when did it move? Have we missed it? There's a lot of questions, but when I play this game, I just think about how desire moves. Honestly, I mean, think about it. The king, the father, you don't want it to get checkmated, so you need to keep it moving. Oh yeah, right here too. And I'm just trying to kind of think or ask myself, like, are we making the mistake when we talk about the father? And I know I'm still using this mythologically. I haven't addressed Lacanian notions of it, but and that's because I'm not entirely familiar, and I feel like it would be just a complete blunder for me to talk about it blindly like that. But I think those of you that know Lacan and Lacanian psychoanalysis, you take what I say and just try to input that in equivalent terms of, what I've been trying to say. You try to make a counter argument or a counter in some fashion to the Lacanian version. Try to do that. At least try. Um, and you can still disagree, but just at least create the counter, because again, I don't know enough to create the counter, but I feel like there's a counter in there. And again, in chess, there's always a counter. There's always a counter, and sometimes it's a double pronged attack. And that's actually what I was meaning when I said sometimes when you put the king in check, it's a forced move, right? But what the opponent doesn't realize is that it's also a threat on another piece that unfortunately he can't protect anymore, because he's put the king in check. And so, again, the question I'm really asking is, how many times have we put the king in check where we're just losing positions of desire, or positions afforded? I think that's maybe the best way to reroute the argument. What are the positions lost that could have been afforded to desire itself? And this idea of forced moves and everything, so on. But I mean, I also think if people are really interested, we can look at these spaces like lack, right? But, if we look at these spaces, right, these squares as lack, it's only for positioning. It's so you don't get caught. I mean, it's so you don't get checkmated, right? All this lack right here, we call this lack, all this is space created so you can move. So you can freaking move, man. And so you can have some breathing room for your king. Because again, right, we go back to the beginning of the game. Let's go back. Boom, right? First move. I could say, look, we could say, yeah, okay, all this space, we could say, someone could say, well, all this space is lack, right? All this space, just lack. Well, I don't know. Is it? Or is it positions? And watch this, right? You could say, oh, there's all this space, all this lack between your queen and so on. But what does that lack afford me to do? Well, it affords me to move my queen and get it out of there. You can interpret that however you want. What I'm trying to say is, it's interesting when we think about it in this way, right? And maybe I use a poor example, and maybe I contradict myself because I did say lack and space and so on. But maybe thinking of space, lack in terms of space, right? Like, I was thinking the other day, a lot of people talk about, I feel like I'm lacking something. It's a very common phrase. Like, I feel like I'm missing something, I'm lacking something, and so on and so on. But here's the thing: what if this lacking something, you're missing something, you feel sad tonight, you feel lonely tonight, something. What if you're this pawn, right? And obviously you feel this space, this between the queen, right? You feel this space. But the thing is, when we get fixated on this lack, we don't realize that we're actually supposed to move. Boom. We're supposed to keep moving. Because this pawn's purpose is not to sit here and just be all up in its lack. This pawn's purpose is to create space for desire to move in, for desire to make more moves. I think I would phrase it that way. For desire to make more moves. Because if I don't move, if I refuse to move, and of course in chess this is impossible because that's obviously, if you refuse to move, then I guess you might as well just resign. But, if you refuse to move, your opponent is just going to develop and just destroy you. He could checkmate you right now, right? And I'll tell you what happened is that if you don't move, you're going to get checkmated. And there's almost little, if anything, you can do. I mean, you can still block, but you're going to just be blocking the entire time. And this is what a forced move would be, right? You'd have to block with this, or maybe block with this, or maybe jump your pawn right here, just so they don't get this diagonal on your king. But I think I talked enough. I think I talked enough. But anyways, I think there's so much to think about when I play chess, and I think about psychoanalysis, and I think about desire, and I think about lack and spaces, spaces in general, and how things move, and even though we could call all these pieces signifying something, and we assign like a point value to them in chess, the problem is that point value doesn't really matter if you can find a position that's winning. Plain and simple. And I think sometimes, and I think this is where Deleuze and Guattari come in to some degree, is that if you have a stagnated idea of representation, then you're going to lose. You're just going to lose because obviously the queen is worth a lot, but that doesn't mean that if you lose your queen, that you're still in a losing position. And you could say that's the cost of representation over position. And again, I think when I look at chess, it kind of makes me question. It's like, okay, maybe instead of completely putting representation on like a pedestal, we just put it back like a second rank, right? We put it back a second rank and we talk about the pawn. Why? Why do we talk about the pawn? The pawn is, in my opinion, the most important piece because it affords you positions to develop your pieces. Affords you positions to move your knight and everything. So chess makes me want to say that actually positions of desire are first, then representation. But if you take representation first and then position of desire second, you're going to lose. You're going to lose. And I've given examples of that when you value your queen too much. When you value your queen too much, because obviously in the game it identifies it as being worth like 9 points, you're going to lose. You're going to lose against a really good player. You're going to lose. But I also think the mistake is the reason why the queen is worth 9 points again is because of the positions that it can make, the spaces that it can make, and the pieces that it can take, all the ways that it can move. But again, sometimes people get too fixated on what it actually means, like because it's worth 9 points, that they'll toss the game, right? They don't see another way, and they'll refuse to give up their queen when they could have done moves, develop their pieces, start pushing, start attacking, and then it's like if you lose your queen, then you can make up for it in some way. You can make up for it. It's not a big deal. And it's not a big deal because if you get this pawn all the way at the end over here, it becomes a queen. So what are you fretting about? So anyways, okay, now I'm definitely done with with the talking. But again, I just hope that this was just provocative enough to cause a response. I'm not really looking for like people to approach me and be like, oh, like you're wrong, and so on and so on. Like, look, man, if you come up with a response and it makes you think about something, I did my job. I'm not looking for like anything else other than that. I don't really have anything else other than that. It's simply anything else above that probably doesn't interest me at that point. Because I'm just trying to be provocative, right? Basically, I'm just being a pawn, right? I'm just making a move, right? And I'm just seeing what you do. And I'm hoping that you'll do something. After that, I'm hoping somebody else will kind of move for me, and see what we can make out of all this, right? But and I think that's it. Yeah. All right. Well, I hope you guys take care. Never really know how to end these videos half the time because I'm just like, all right, I'm done talking. Bye. That's really how I want to end these videos at the time. I'm like, okay, I'm done talking. Bye. Like I guess I'm awkward like that, or very blunt like that. I have no like signature sign off. Like, okay, like, hey, we're all completed now, so bye. But yeah, okay. So take care, guys. Bye.